This is Infinite Cataclysm. In my last video, I covered every variation of the build in broad strokes, and in this video, I'm going to show you the specifics of the leveling guide. Now that I've gotten my hands on it, I can tell you it's extremely strong for leveling in Season 7, but the endgame will be even stronger. I cleared to pit 20 to show you guys that the build will work, but it was so easy that I upped it to pit 35 to show you that it works even better. It's easily clearing a pit 35 without any masterworking whatsoever, not to mention a nearly complete lack of ancestral items. Now, if you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and come join my Twitch at twitch.tv/screamheart. Real quick, before I get into the build, let me remind you of some important early game stuff that you should know. First off, go and grab your mercenaries. Mercenaries are from the expansion, so if you don't have the expansion, don't worry about it, but you need to go and actually equip your mercenaries so they can start leveling up. Something else that's very important as well, make sure you equip your pet. Your pet's going to pick up your gold and a bunch of stuff, and it's going to save you time in the long run. And also, don't forget about elixirs. Elixirs give you bonus experience, so very useful. Not to mention when you're leveling up, you also get the ashes from the seasonal thing, and those can be put into getting bonus experience. Now let me break it down for you. So I just showed you gameplay of me clearing a tier 35 pit, and this is the gear I was using. As you can see, I'm mostly using non-ancestral items, but I did get lucky and get an early ancestral weapon, as well as a juicy ancestral ring. But these aren't going to make or break the difference. However, the weapon does add a good amount of power. Another thing I got slightly lucky on was getting my Tacits of Dawning Sky. This is an item that you can throw on early to get your resistances up. There's also a couple of pairs of boots that also have all the resistances. Having these pants made it a lot easier for me to hit my resists, and as you can see for Torment 2, I'm actually a little bit low. But if you don't have this, you can solve that problem by getting all resist rolls on your gear. And you can get that in any defensive slot, so it's pretty easy. Same deal with trying to hit your 1000 armor. Just make sure you roll some armor on your gear. Now at this point in the game, flat damage is extremely strong. What I mean by flat damage are things like the 68% on my weapon here. Another example would be the 75% critical damage on this ring, or the 13% storm damage that I tempered on this amulet. Now I've got a written guide under the video recommending the aspects that I think you should use, but where you place them is going to depend on where you're at in your build. So for example, right now, I don't have cooldown reduction on an amulet, I don't have cooldown reduction on a helmet, I didn't get an Erida's drop, or a Mjolnir ring drop, I also didn't get a Dolmen Stone, which is another one you could use for cooldown reduction, or a Shaco. What that means is that my ultimate does not have great uptime. I've only got 19 seconds active out of every 36, which is just barely over half. So, in this situation, typically you would not prioritize having your ultimate damage on your weapon. So don't ask me why I have it on my weapon right now. But basically, your retaliation you're going to want to have on your two-hander if you're in a similar situation to me. If you feel like your ult uptime is actually doing pretty well, then you want to have this here. And if you are still using retaliation, you're probably going to want to use Skinwalkers, because Skinwalkers is going to help you keep your Fortify up. The only other good option for keeping your Fortify on this early in the game is to change your Spirit Boon from a Calamity to Bolster. But that's going to reduce your ult uptime, so I highly recommend trying to get it from Skinwalkers instead. Another big benefit to early game leveling is having a lot of movement speed. So an aspect like Aspect of Slaughter, movement speed tempers, and just straight up movement speed rolls on your boots and amulet can add a lot to your movement speed in the early game. Or you could just be lucky and get a Mjolnir ring or a Dolmen Stone, and that might do it for you. Another thing worth mentioning at this point in the game is that your temper for weapon could go into Cataclysm or Lightning Storm, and both will be beneficial. Which one you prefer is going to depend on where you're at in the game, but at the point I'm at, I don't really care whether it's one or the other. And for all of your offensive tempers, which you should prioritize in the early game, you can let them land on critical strike chance or storm damage, and both of them will be beneficial for you. I don't do lightning bolt damage until I get the Mjolnir ring, because that's what's going to make the bolt damage go into my ultimate. Now I'm going to pull up my written guide because I want to make sure you guys are following this and not the weird stuff I have in my own build, because I tend to do stuff just randomly as I'm playing based off of how I feel at the moment. But for the skills, you're using Earth Spike for a couple of different reasons. One, Earth Spike is going to be giving you Spirit whenever you need it. It also gives you Fortify if enemies happen to be immobilized, which we do a decent amount of. And it sets up Resonance as well as Natural Balance. So Resonance increases your damage for the entire duration of your channel if you hold the button down for your Lightning Storm. Same thing if you cast it right before casting your Cataclysm. So it's just a good way to boost your damage, especially if you actively think about it and do it beforehand. Of course, sometimes it's more beneficial to spam your Lightning Storm if you don't have an issue with Spirit, because that will actually increase your DPS. But it's situational, so use it in whichever way you want to. The Natural Balance is going to increase your critical strike chance, and that's very useful in the early game before we get our guaranteed crits for our ultimate. In the early game, Lightning Storm is going to be your main source of damage between your ultimates, but the Cataclysm is still going to clean up whenever it's active. By using Lightning Dancer, whenever we get critical strikes, we're going to be doing even more AoE damage, so don't underestimate Lightning Storm and how much work it can do. Especially if you end up getting some tempers that are going into bolt damage, you could just do a ton of AoE damage with your Lightning Storm. Hurricane in the early game is not nearly as important because we're not going to be a werewolf and we're not going to get the extra skill ranks while we're doing it. So if there's something you prefer to use here, feel free to swap it out. You could go for something like wolves in the early game because they can act as a little bit of a tank and they do decent damage. You could also do something like poison creeper that does a lot of damage early on and immobilizes enemies, which synergizes with the rest. Trample is going to be a great way to break CC, but it's also going to give you a lot more mobility in the early game, and it's going to give you a lot more spirit in the early game. Same thing with Blood Howl, this is just giving you more spirit and healing in the early game. For the spirit boons, I'm using Gift of the Stag, Scythe Talons, Avian Wrath, Calamity, and Overload. We're not shapeshifting yet, so we can't use Masochistic, so we may as well just apply additional poison using our Overload. We're using Scythe Talons because we have lower critical strike chance in the early game, and we still benefit from the maximum spirit with Gift of the Stag, even if we don't have our ancestral guidance yet. For our aspects, we're going with Skinwalkers for the Fortify. It also gives some healing, which is nice. We're going with Disobedience in order to hit our armor more easily. That's also why we're using Juggernaut on our pants. So if you don't need the armor, feel free to swap both of these out. I just realized I still have Rune Workers in here, which is not supposed to be on the leveling build. We're going to swap that out for Vehement Brawlers. We're going with Slaughter on the boots for more movement speed, Retaliation on the weapon to up our Lightning Storm damage, Apogeic Furor on the amulet so we can still build up our ultimate damage and tear up bosses, Lightning Dancer for that AoE clear, and Natural Balance for the crit. For runes in the early game, we're going to be using Seer with Gar. This is going to give us some critical strike chance just by using skills, and these are both magic runes, so you're going to be able to get them very easily. We're also going to be using Sem and Lum, and this is just going to give us some extra spirit whenever we evade. Now you can use a different one than the evade in case you're using Juggernauts, because Juggernauts is going to make you evade less. So if that's the case, feel free to go with whatever you want there. The only change I did for the Witchcraft Powers in the early game version is I went with Aura of Lament. Aura of Lament is going to give you increased spirit, and this will just help you manage your spirit for your Lightning Storm. If you do put runes and gems, you still want to use Sapphire, and I don't think the witch items are too important in the early game, so you probably don't even need to worry about these right away. But for the early game witch powers, this is what I ended up using. So I've got Vengeful Spirit, I've got Soul Harvest, Twilight Warding, Aura of Lament, Aura Siphoning, and Poison Frog Servant. Feel free to use whatever you feel is useful and experiment around in the early game. But if you're going to level any up, try and level the ones that I have set up for the endgame version. Now, if it's not obvious, the gameplay loop that I have listed here is not for the early game version. In the early game version, you're just going to be casting your ultimate and using Lightning Storm in between. Any of the other skills, like the defensive skills, you can use as you need them, either for CC or for Spirit. And actually, one more note really quickly on the aspects. You can use Blood Boiling aspect instead of either Natural Balance or Vehement Brawlers. And if you just pay attention a little bit, you can use your Blood Boil on your ultimate to get guaranteed overpowers. That's a pretty easy way to do it in the early game. For the early game leveling, you're going to want to put points into Earth Spike, and you just need to know that Fierce Earth Spike is going to give you Fortify only if the enemy is already immobilized. Your Lightning Storm has a chance to immobilize, so those two will synergize really well. Your Earthen Bulwark is giving you a barrier. It's also giving you some Fortify to help with the retaliation, and it's helping you be unstoppable. Blood Howl is going to be healing you and giving you spirit, and both Earthen Bulwark and Blood Howl are giving you not only damage from backlash, but also damage reduction from vigilance. We're getting more damage from Feral Aptitude, and we're getting a whole bunch of benefits from Endless Tempest, Bad Omen, Electric Shock, and Charged Atmosphere that are going to up our damage, increase the duration of our Hurricane and our Cataclysm, and give us more chance to immobilize. Hurricane's going to reduce enemy damage, and that's the main purpose we're using it for. The Trample's giving us a big chunk of spirit, so you can basically use this as a way to just straight up refill your spirit whenever you get low. Envenom's going to give us a bunch of damage when we critical strike poisoned enemies. We're getting a whole bunch of damage from Defiance, Natural Disaster, and Resonance. Keep in mind that you have to have enemies immobilized to get the bonus on Natural Disaster. We're getting some early game healing with Circle of Life, and our Cataclysm is giving us guaranteed vulnerable on enemies. We're getting a bit more damage from Catastrophe, but only for 8 seconds after we cast our ult, so getting the cooldown lower is very beneficial. And then for our Keystone passive, we're using Perfect Storm in the early game because it's much easier to get this damage online, and it also helps us with our spirit management. Now I went ahead and made you guys some Paragon boards for leveling. Feel free to ignore these if you'd rather just follow the entire thing and not have to respec later, but these will optimize your early game damage. So I'm going to coin a term right now called Squish and Stretch. Basically the idea is that if you were at a certain point on your board, let's say you were right here, and you were just now adding your Ancestral Guidance, and this is all you would have on your board at the moment, and you start pathing up here, and you grab these nodes, and you realize, oh wait, I can't even get my Ancestral Guidance right now. Well, then it's probably not worth it to make your way all the way up here. Instead, what I would do is remove all of these points, including that board, and then in the initial board, I would go through and I would add all of the flat damage. If I have some extra points, I would even go for some of the health, and maybe even drop down here and grab some additional health and armor. Then once I have enough points to be able to make it up there, I would pull the points out of here, especially out of the defensive ones, because you don't really need it in the early game. And then I would path up and I would grab my Ancestral Guidance, as well as any other nearby useful nodes. And then you repeat the process. So here you might say, okay, I'm going to follow your guide and I'm going to make my way up here, but then you get stuck right there. Well, that's not very useful to you. So you would either be removing points down here to be able to keep making progress up top, or if you don't have any points to remove down there in order to do it, then you just forget about these points for now, and you focus on condensing into as much useful stuff as you can in the spot that you're at. Now, this build should work really good for you, but if you have any questions at all, feel free to come by my Twitch at twitch.tv/screamheart, or join us in the Discord at discord.gg/screamheart. If you enjoy my content, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Daddy Druid out.
Subscribe to Screamheart. He's more than an old fart. He makes lots of fun builds. I promise his streams chill. He should probably be faster. Come watch this disaster.